Welcome, dear friends of Greek mythology. Welcome to all who find solace in the ancient tales that have echoed through millennia. Tonight, we gather once more beneath the starlit canopy of stories old as time itself, here on Greek Myths for Sleep, where the gods and heroes of antiquity guide us gently toward peaceful slumber in the violet hour when dusk kisses the marble columns of distant temples, when the Mediterranean breeze carries whispers of forgotten prayers across the olive groves. There begins a tale seldom told in its fullness, the story of Ares, whose name has thundered through the ages, yet whose essence remains as mysterious as the morning mist that clings to Mount Olympus. Before we begin, if you enjoy these quiet journeys through ancient myth, feel free to subscribe to Greek Myths for Sleep and leave a gentle like. It helps this story reach others who need rest, just like you, high above the mortal realm, where clouds form pillows for divine dreams and stars trace patterns older than memory. There dwells a god whose very nature seems at odds with the tranquility of this celestial place. Ares, son of Zeus and Hera, moves through the halls of Olympus like a distant storm, powerful yet contained, fierce yet somehow lonely in his purpose. The other gods watch him with eyes that hold both respect and unease, for they understand that even in paradise there must be one who carries the weight of conflict, who embodies the forces that both create and destroy. As twilight deepens into night, we find ourselves drawn to understand this most misunderstood of immortals. The gentle breeze that rustles through the sacred laurel trees seems to whisper his true story, not the tale of bloodshed and battle that mortals often tell, but something deeper, more profound. For Ares represents not merely war, but the eternal struggle that exists within all things. The tension between chaos and order, between passion and reason, between the wild heart and the civilized mind. In the beginning, when the cosmos was young and the gods themselves were finding their places in the grand design, Ares emerged from the union of the king and queen of heaven. His birth was marked not by violence, but by a peculiar silence that fell across Olympus, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Hera cradled her son and saw in his eyes not the rage that others would later fear, but a deep intensity, a flame that would burn eternal. Zeus looked upon his son and recognized something of his own power reflected back, yet transformed into something rawer, more primal. The young god grew swiftly, as all divine children do, but where his siblings found their purposes in wisdom, beauty, craftsmanship, or nature, Ares seemed to drift like a ship without anchor. He would stand at the edge of Olympus, gazing down at the mortal world with eyes that held neither contempt nor affection, but a strange sort of understanding. The other young gods played their games and learned their crafts, but Ares walked alone through the celestial gardens, his footsteps leaving no trace on the ambrosial grass. It was Athena, his sister, who first recognized what others missed. where they saw only potential for destruction, she perceived the necessary balance he would bring. One evening, as purple shadows lengthened across the divine realm, she found him sitting beside the fountain of eternal youth, watching the water cascade in endless, peaceful cycles, without words, for sometimes gods communicate in silence more profound than speech. She sat beside him. Together, they watched the water flow, and in that shared quiet, an understanding passed between them. They would be forever opposed, yet forever bound, two sides of the same cosmic coin. The mortals below began to know war, as mortals always do, and with each conflict, they called upon Ares, sometimes in fear, sometimes in desperate hope. He would descend from Olympus, wrapped in mist and shadow, not with the joy of destruction that storytellers often attribute to him, but with the solemn duty of one who must oversee what cannot be avoided. In those early days, he learned the weight of his purpose to embody not the cause of conflict, but its spirit when conflict became inevitable. There are chambers in Olympus that few ever visit, quiet spaces where the gods retreat when the burden of immortality grows heavy. Ares claimed one such chamber for himself, a room where the walls seemed to shift between scenes of battle and moments of profound peace. Here, he would sit in contemplation, understanding that his role was perhaps the loneliest among all the Olympians, while Aphrodite spread love and Apollo brought music and healing, while Demeter nurtured growth and Hermes carried messages of hope. Ares carried the knowledge that strife was woven into the very fabric of existence. Yet in this solitude, something beautiful began to emerge. The god of war became a student of peace, for who better to understand the value of tranquility than one who witnesses its absence? In the pre-dawn hours, when even immortals rest, Ares would walk through mortal battlefields after the conflict had passed. He would touch the earth where warriors had fallen, and though he could not bring them back, he would ensure their courage was remembered in the wind that swept across the empty plains. The relationship between Ares and Aphrodite, goddess of love, has been told many times, but rarely with the depth it deserves. It was not mere passion that drew them together, but a recognition of complementary forces. Where he brought conflict, she brought resolution. Where he represented the storm, she was the calm that followed. Their connection transcended the simple narrative of opposites attracting it, was the universe acknowledging that love and war, creation and destruction, joy and sorrow, are all threads in the same tapestry. On nights when the moon hung full and silver above Mount Olympus, they would meet in gardens where immortal roses bloomed with petals soft as whispered promises. Aphrodite would run her fingers through his dark hair, and in her touch, Ares found the only peace he truly knew. She understood what others could not, that beneath the armor of the war god beat a heart that felt too deeply, that carried the pain of every conflict he had ever witnessed. In her arms, the god of war could simply be, without judgment or fear. Their children Eros and Tyros, Phobos, Deimos, and Harmonia, each reflected different aspects of their parents' natures. But it was Harmonia, goddess of harmony and concord, who best embodied the truth of their union. In her, the seemingly opposing forces of her parents found perfect balance. She would often sit with her father during his quiet moments, and together they would weave tapestries that showed not glorious victories, but the moments of peace that followed soldiers returning home, enemies becoming friends, swords being beaten into plowshares. The mortal world continued its endless dance of conflict and resolution, and Ares continued his eternal vigil. But something began to change in the god of war, where once he had moved through battles as a force of nature, unconscious and overwhelming. He began to see the individual stories within each conflict. A young soldier fighting to protect his family, a warrior princess defending her people's freedom, an old general weary of bloodshed, seeking one last victory to secure lasting peace. These stories accumulated in Ares like sand in an hourglass, each grain a life touched by conflict, each moment a lesson in the complexity of mortal existence. He began to appear to warriors, not just in the heat of battle, but in the quiet moments before, in the pre-dawn darkness, when fear and courage wrestled in their hearts. His presence was not always to incite, but sometimes to steady, to remind them that bravery was not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. There came a day when Zeus, observing his son from his golden throne, called Ares to him. The king of gods had watched the transformation in his child, seen how the simple god of war had evolved into something more complex, more necessary. In the great throne room of Olympus, with its ceiling that opened to show all the stars that ever were or would be, father and son stood face to face. Zeus placed his hand on Ares' shoulder, and in that touch was both acknowledgement and understanding. The god of war was not a mistake or a necessary evil. He was the guardian of necessary change, the overseer of transformation through trial. This recognition shifted something fundamental in how Ares moved through both mortal and immortal realms. He began to work more closely with other gods, understanding that his domain touched all others. With Demeter, he learned how conflict could clear the way for new growth, like fire that allows certain seeds to germinate. With Hephaestus, he discovered how the same force that could destroy could also forge and create. With Hermes, he found that messages of war and messages of peace often traveled the same roads. The sacred animals of Ares, the serpent, the dog, the vulture, and the boar each held deeper meaning than mortals typically understood. The serpent, with its ability to shed its skin, represented transformation through struggle. The dog embodied loyalty and the protective instinct that often sparked conflict. The vulture, far from being merely a symbol of death, served as nature's cleaner, ensuring that even in destruction, there was purpose and renewal. The boar, wild and untamed, reminded all that some forces in nature and in the heart could never be fully civilized, nor should they be. In the mortal city of Sparta, Ares was honored not with festivals of bloodshed, but with rituals that acknowledged the discipline and sacrifice required of warriors. Young men and women would train not just their bodies, but their minds, understanding that true strength came from knowing when to fight and when to seek peace. The god would sometimes walk among them in disguise, an old soldier sharing stories by the fire, reminding them that the greatest victory was surviving to see another dawn. As centuries flowed like water through the fingers of time, Ares witnessed the evolution of conflict itself. From bronze to iron, from sword to strategy, from individual combat to the movement of armies, like chess pieces on a vast board. Each age brought new lessons, new understandings of his domain. He watched mortals create rules of war, attempting to bring order to chaos. And while some gods might have laughed at such efforts, Ares appreciated the impulse. Even in conflict, mortals sought meaning, sought to maintain their humanity. There were moments of profound beauty hidden within his realm. The moment when enemies, recognizing each other's humanity, chose mercy over victory. The soldier who carried a wounded foe to safety. The general who chose surrender to save his people rather than glory for himself. These moments Ares collected like precious gems, proof that even in the darkest aspects of existence, light could shine through. The god's relationship with his mother, Hera, deserves contemplation in these quiet hours. She who had given him life understood perhaps better than any the burden he carried. In the private moments when they walked together through the gardens of Olympus, she would take his arm and they would speak of things only a mother and son could share. She had known from his birth that his path would be difficult, that he would be misunderstood, sometimes reviled, but she also knew that without him, the balance of existence would falter. Hera would tell him stories of the primordial times before the Olympians, when chaos reigned unchecked. She helped him understand that his role was not to create conflict, but to give it form when it inevitably arose. Without Ares, mortal conflicts would be mere savage chaos. With him, they had the potential for honor, for rules, for eventual resolution. He was not the god of slaughter, but the god of organized conflict, a crucial distinction that many missed. The fortress of Ares in Thrace stood not as a monument to war, but as a sanctuary for those touched by conflict. Here, veterans of countless battles could find respite. The walls, which appeared forbidding from the outside, enclosed gardens of surpassing peace. Springs of healing water bubbled up from sacred ground, and trees heavy with fruit provided sustenance for any who sought shelter. It was a place where swords could be laid down, where armor could be removed, where the warrior could remember the person beneath. In these gardens grew the strangest flowers' blooms that only opened after storms. their petals the color of dawn after the darkest night. Aries would tend these flowers himself, understanding their symbolism. Beauty that emerged from struggle, peace that followed pain, hope that bloomed in the aftermath of despair. Veterans would sit among these flowers and find, perhaps for the first time in years, the ability to weep for what they had seen and done. And in those tears was the beginning of healing. The god's chariot, pulled by 4 immortal horses named Fire, Flame, Terror, and Trouble, might seem to embody only destruction. But look closer, as we do in this gentle hour, and see that fire brings warmth and light. Flame can forge and purify. Terror can teach us the value of courage, and trouble can lead to growth and change. Even his most fearsome aspects served purposes beyond simple devastation. There is a constellation in the night sky that mortals associate with Aries, stars that form the shape of a warrior at rest. But if you know where to look, if you observe with patient eyes as the night deepens, you can see that the warrior's hand extends not in threat, but in greeting. His other hand rests over his heart in a gesture of sincerity. This is the true Aries, the complete god, not just of war, but of the courage to face necessary conflicts and the wisdom to seek peace when possible. The mysteries of Aries include rituals performed not on battlefields, but in temples of healing. Warriors who had seen too much, carried too much, would come to these sacred spaces. Through dance and movement, they would tell the stories their words could not express. Through rhythm and repetition, they would release the tensions that threatened to consume them. Aries himself would sometimes appear at these rituals, not as the fierce god of war, but as a fellow warrior who understood their pain. As our story deepens like the night around us, consider the sacred groves dedicated to Aries. Unlike what one might expect, these were not places of violence, but of profound tranquility. Ancient trees stood as witnesses to oaths of peace, their roots deep in earth that had known both blood and renewal. Birds nested in branches that had seen centuries pass, their songs a reminder that life persists, that morning always follows the darkest night. In one such grove, there grew an olive tree of particular significance. It was said that Ares himself had planted it after a great war between mortal cities had finally ended. The tree grew twisted and gnarled, bearing the scars of its harsh beginning, but it produced the sweetest olives, and its oil was prized for anointing those who worked for peace. This tree stood as a living reminder that from conflict could come sustenance, that struggle could lead to strength. The philosophical schools of ancient Greece often debated the nature of Ares and his place in the cosmic order. Some saw him as necessary evil, others as misunderstood good. But the wisest understood that such binary thinking missed the point. Ares existed beyond good and evil in the realm of necessary forces. Like gravity or time, he simply was. The question was not whether he should exist, but how mortals could best understand and work with his energy. These philosophers told their students a parable. Imagine a world without Ares, without any conflict whatsoever. At first, it seems paradise. But look deeper. Without challenge, there is no growth. Without opposition, no definition. Without the possibility of conflict, courage becomes meaningless, as does peace itself. Ares, they taught, was not the enemy of peace, but its essential counterpart, the shadow that gave light meaning. In the islands scattered across the wine-dark sea, sailors would make offerings to Ares, not for victory in battle, but for the strength to weather storms. They understood that the god of conflict governed not just human warfare, but all forms of struggle, including the eternal contest between mortal ambition and natural force. Their prayers were not for their enemies' destruction, but for their own endurance, for the wisdom to know when to fight the waves and when to work with them. The midnight hour approaches in our tale, that liminal time when the veil between mortal and divine grows thin. In these hours, Ares would sometimes walk the earth not as a god, but as a wanderer, cloaked in mist and starlight. He would visit battlefields long grown over with grass and wildflowers, running his hands through the grain that grew tall where warriors had fallen. He would pause at monuments erected to forgotten conflicts, reading names worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. On one such night, the stories tell, he encountered an old woman placing flowers at a simple stone marker. She could not see his divine nature, shrouded as it was, but she spoke to him as one stranger to another in the darkness. She told him of her son, lost in a war so long ago that no one else remembered its cause. She came here each year, she said, not in anger or seeking vengeance, but to remember that he had lived, had loved, had mattered. Ares sat with her through the night, and when dawn came, she found that flowers had bloomed all around the marker flowers that bloomed still, generations later, a god's tribute to a mother's undying love. The relationship between Ares and mortals was always complex, never the simple dynamic of worshipper and deity. He respected those who respected him, not through bloodlust or eagerness for battle, but through understanding of what his domain truly meant. The greatest warriors in his eyes were often those who fought least, who found ways to resolve conflicts without drawing swords. The courage to face an enemy with open hands, he knew, often required more bravery than facing them with weapons. In the divine realm, as the eons passed, Ares found unexpected friendships. With Hestia, goddess of the hearth, he discovered the deep connection between his realm and hers. For what were warriors fighting for, if not the chance to return to their own hearths? What was worth defending, if not the sacred flame of home and family? They would sit together in comfortable silence, the goddess of the home and the god of conflict, understanding that they were not opposites, but partners in the great dance of existence. Apollo, god of music and prophecy, taught Ares about the power of art to heal what war had wounded. Together, they inspired mortals to create songs not of glorious victory, but of shared humanity. The greatest war ballads, they agreed, were those that made listeners weep for both sides, that remembered the fallen not as enemies, but as children of the same earth, returning to the same dust. Music, Apollo showed his brother, could bridge chasms that swords had carved. With Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the wild places, Ares found another unexpected connection. She understood the primal nature of conflict, the dance of predator and prey that existed throughout nature. But she also showed him the balance inherent in wildness, how the wolf and deer, the hawk and rabbit existed in eternal tension that created not destruction, but sustainable life. From her, he learned that conflict need not mean annihilation, that opposition could create harmony. The sacred weapons of Ares held their own mysteries. His spear, forged in the heart of a dying star, could pierce any armor, but its greater power was its weight. Only those who fought for justice could lift it. His shield bore no emblem of victory or intimidation, but rather a mirror-like surface that showed attackers their own faces, forcing them to confront who they were and what they were becoming. His helm, which rendered him terrible to behold in battle, also allowed him to see the true motivations in mortal hearts, the fear disguised as aggression, the love disguised as duty, the desperation disguised as courage. As our tale continues to unfold like a slowly blooming night flower, we must speak of the children of Ares beyond those born of his union with Aphrodite. For the god of war was father to many, and each child reflected a different aspect of his nature. There was Alsip, whose name meant mighty mare, who inherited her father's strength, but chose to use it to defend those who could not defend themselves. There was Thrax, who founded the land of Thrace and taught his people that true warrior culture meant discipline, honor, and the protection of the weak. But perhaps most interesting was Harmonia, already mentioned, who chose to weave her life between the mortal and divine realms. She married Cadmus, founder of Thebes, and in doing so, brought divine understanding of conflict and resolution into human governance. Through her, mortals learned that the same passionate energy that could destroy could also create, that the fire of conflict could be channeled into the forge of civilization. The festivals honoring Ares were not what outsiders might expect. Yes, there were displays of martial prowess, but the heart of these celebrations lay elsewhere. Veterans would share their stories, not of glory, but of survival and return. Young people would take oaths not to seek conflict, but to stand ready should their communities need defense. The culmination was always a great feast where former enemies were invited to break bread together, to see each other as fellow humans rather than faceless foes. In the gentle hours before dawn, when night begins its slow retreat before the coming day, Ares would return to Olympus from his earthly wanderings. He would climb the celestial mountain slowly, not from weariness gods, no physical fatigue, but from the weight of all he had witnessed. Each step carried the memory of mortal struggles, of courage and cowardice, of necessary battles and needless slaughters, of peace hard won and too easily lost. At the summit, he would often find Athena waiting for him, his sister, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, understood him in ways few others could. They would stand together as the first light touched the peaks of Olympus, not speaking, simply being. In her presence, he could lay down the burden of being misunderstood, of being seen only as destroyer when he knew himself to be so much more. She saw him complete the god who brought conflict, yes, but also the god who made resolution possible, who gave mortals the chance to show their best and worst, to choose who they would become in extremity. The dawn wind would carry the scent of ambrosia from the divine gardens, mixing with the earthier smells that clung to Ares from his mortal wanderings, iron and earth, sweat and tears, blood and healing herbs. This mixture created a unique perfume that was his alone among the gods, marking him as the bridge between the raw reality of mortal existence and the refined atmosphere of the divine. As centuries became millennia, the worship of Ares evolved. Mystery cults arose that understood his deeper nature. In their secret ceremonies, initiates learned that the greatest battle was always between our higher and lower natures, between what we are and what we could become. They practiced martial arts not to dominate others, but to master themselves. They studied strategy not to win wars, but to avoid them. They honored Ares not as the god who brought conflict, but as the god who governed it when it could not be avoided. These mysteries taught that every mortal carried a spark of Ares within them, the capacity for both creation and destruction, the power to defend or attack, the choice between necessary force and needless violence. The ultimate revelation of these mysteries was that true victory meant transcending the need for victory, that the greatest warrior was one who created peace, that the highest honor Ares could bestow was the strength to sheath one's sword forever. In the great library of Olympus, where all stories ever told are preserved, there exists a special section dedicated to tales of conflicts avoided, wars prevented, enemies who became allies. Ares himself curated this collection, adding to it whenever mortals chose dialogue over destruction, whenever potential battles became partnerships instead. These stories, he knew, were his true victories, not the conflicts he oversaw, but those that never needed to happen because mortals had learned wisdom. The god would sometimes sit in this library, reading these accounts by the light of stars visible through the crystal ceiling. Each story reinforced his understanding that his ultimate purpose was not to perpetuate conflict, but to help mortals move beyond it. He was not the god of eternal war, but the god of necessary struggle leading to eventual transcendence. Like a teacher whose greatest success is when students no longer need instruction. Aries looked forward to a time when his intervention would no longer be required. But that time had not yet come, and so he continued his eternal vigil. Each day brought new challenges to the mortal realm, not just wars between nations, but conflicts within hearts, struggles between duty and desire, battles between who we are and who we wish to be. In all these conflicts, great and small, Aries was present, not as the instigator, but as the force that gave form to inevitable tensions, that provided a framework within which resolution could be found. As our tale begins to wind toward its close, like a great river approaching the sea, let us remember that Aries was also the god of courage, not just physical bravery in battle, but the deeper courage required for living, the courage to face one's fears, to stand for justice when it would be easier to remain silent, to choose the difficult right over the easy wrong. This aspect of his nature touched every mortal life, whether they ever held a weapon or not. Parents showed Aryan courage when they defended their children. Healers displayed it when they entered plague-stricken cities. Teachers embodied it when they spoke truth in the face of popular lies. Artists channeled it when they created beauty in dark times. In all these acts, the true spirit of Aries was present, not the destroyer, but the empowerer, not the bringer of conflict, but the giver of strength to face life's inevitable challenges. The twilight deepens around us now, and somewhere in the distance, a nightingale begins its ethereal song. This bird was sacred to Aries, not for any warlike quality, but for its ability to sing most beautifully in the darkness. Like the god himself, it transformed something that could inspire fear the night into an occasion for beauty. Its song reminded all who heard it that even in the darkest hours, grace was possible. In the mortal realm, temples to Aries began to include healing chambers where those wounded by conflict in body, mind, or spirit could find sanctuary. Priests and priestesses trained not just in martial arts, but in the arts of healing, understanding that one who served the god of war must also know how to mend what war had broken. These temples became centers of reconciliation, where old enemies could meet on neutral ground, where the cycle of vengeance could be broken through understanding. The sacred texts of Aries, carved on tablets of meteoric iron, spoke not of tactics and strategies, but of principles. They taught that conflict was like fire, a powerful force that could destroy or create, depending on how it was used. They emphasized that the goal of any conflict should be resolution, not domination. They insisted that mercy in victory was not weakness, but the highest strength. They proclaimed that the greatest offering one could make to Aries was not the blood of enemies, but the transformation of enmity into understanding. As night fully embraces the world, wrapping all in its gentle darkness, we see Aries in his truest form. Not the blood-soaked warrior of mortal imagination, but a complex deity carrying one of existence's heaviest burdens. He stands on the highest peak of Olympus, his divine sight encompassing all the struggles of the mortal realm, every conflict, every choice between fight and flight, every moment when beings must decide who they are in the face of opposition. His expression is not one of joy in destruction, but of infinite compassion for those who must endure struggle. He sees the soldier who fights not from hatred, but from love of what lies behind him. He sees the protester who stands against injustice, armed only with truth and courage. He sees the child who faces the bully, the worker who confronts exploitation, the citizen who challenges tyranny. In all these, he recognizes his children, spiritual if not literal, carrying forward the best aspects of his nature. The other gods of Olympus, gathered for their nightly council, regard him with new understanding. Zeus nods his acknowledgement of a son who has grown into his role with grace. Hera's eyes hold maternal pride for a child who has transformed what could have been mere violence into something approaching wisdom. Athena offers a small smile of recognition to her eternal counterpart, acknowledging that together they encompass the full spectrum of conflict and resolution. Even Aphrodite is there, her presence a reminder that love and conflict are not opposites, but dance partners in the eternal ballet of existence. She alone knows the gentleness that resides in the heart of the war god, the tears he sheds for every mortal who falls in battle, the joy he feels when swords are beaten into plowshares. Their eyes meet across the divine assembly, and in that glance is contained the mystery of creation itself, how opposing forces can create harmony, how destruction can lead to renewal, how love can bloom in the most unlikely ground. As our story nears its end, the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, each point of light a sun around which worlds spin, each world containing its own struggles and triumphs. Ares watches over them all, not as a tyrant glorying in conflict, but as a guardian ensuring that when struggle comes, as it must in any universe where growth is possible, it serves a purpose beyond mere destruction. The wind carries the scent of night-blooming jasmine through the halls of Olympus, its sweetness a counterpoint to the iron that always faintly surrounds Ares. This mixture beauty and strength, gentleness and power, perfectly captures the essence of the God we have come to know in these quiet hours. He is not one thing or another, but all things necessary for existence to find its balance. In mortal cities below, night watchmen walk their rounds, protecting sleeping citizens. Ares strengthens their steps, for they embody his truest nature, not seeking conflict, but standing ready to face it should it threaten those under their protection. In harbors, sailors prepare for dawn voyages, checking weapons they hope never to use. Ares steadies their hands, for they understand that readiness for conflict can prevent its necessity. Somewhere, a veteran warrior tends a garden, having traded sword for pruning shears. Yet Aries is no less present here than on any battlefield. For this too is his domain, the peace that follows war, the creation that follows destruction, the gentle strength of one who has faced darkness and chosen light. The flowers that bloom under the veteran's care are offerings to Aries as surely as any spoils of war, perhaps more precious for representing life chosen over death. The moon, in its silver wisdom, casts shadows that remind us of the dual nature of all things. Where there is light, shadow follows. Where there is peace, the potential for conflict exists. Where there is love, the possibility of loss lingers. Aries governs these boundaries, these liminal spaces where opposites meet and sometimes merge. He is the guardian of thresholds, the god who stands between what we are and what we might become through struggle. As you rest in these quiet moments, dear listener, know that the peace you feel has been earned by countless acts of courage throughout history. Every moment of tranquility exists because someone, somewhere, had the strength to face conflict and transform it into resolution. This is the gift of Aries, not war itself, but the courage to face what must be faced, the strength to endure what must be endured, the wisdom to know when to fight and when to embrace peace. The temple bells of Olympus toll softly, marking the passage of divine time. Their bronze voices carry across both mortal and immortal realms, a reminder that all things flow, all things change, all things transform. Aries listens to these bells and knows that they toll for every conflict begun and every conflict ended, for every warrior who takes up arms and every warrior who lays them down, for every moment of courage and every choice of mercy. In the sacred pools of Olympus, where the gods sometimes glimpse possible futures, Aries sees visions of times to come. He sees conflicts more complex than simple physical battles, wars of ideas, struggles for justice, battles against humanity's own worst impulses. But he also sees the evolution of human understanding, the slow recognition that true strength lies not in domination, but in cooperation, not in conquest, but in connection. These visions bring him hope, for they suggest that his role will evolve as mortals do, from overseer of destruction to guardian of necessary change. The night grows deeper still, and even the nocturnal creatures begin to settle into rest. Owls cease their hunting calls, returning to their roosts with the wisdom of successful hunts. Bats fold their wings and cluster together for warmth, their conflicts over territory forgotten in the face of shared need for comfort. Even in nature, Aries observes, conflict serves its purpose and then gives way to peace. In his private chambers, Aries keeps mementos not of great victories, but of conflicts resolved. A broken sword reforged into a plowshare, letters between former enemies who became friends, children's drawings sent by those whose parents returned from war. Each item tells a story of transformation, of the alchemy that turns base conflict into golden resolution. These are his true treasures, worth more than any spoils of war. As the eastern sky begins to show the faintest hint of approaching dawn, still hours away, but inevitable, as the tide Aries prepares for his final meditation of the night, he sits in the lotus position, this god of war, and contemplates the paradox of his existence. To bring peace, one must understand war. To end conflict, one must know its nature. To heal wounds, one must comprehend how they are made. He is the surgeon who must cut to cure, the teacher who must challenge to educate, the parent who must discipline to guide. The sacred flame that burns eternally in his shrine flickers, with colors not found in mortal fire, deep purples of bruises healing, silver of swords being sheathed, gold of courage recognized, blue of tears, both bitter and cathartic. This flame has burned since the first conflict arose in the cosmos, and it will burn until the last resolution is reached. It is both warning and comfort, threat and promise, ending and beginning. Around this flame, the shadows dance their ancient dance, telling stories older than words. They show the first moment when two forces met in opposition, and from their conflict created something new. They reveal the secret truth that Aries has always known, that creation and destruction are not opposites, but partners, that every ending contains a beginning, that every conflict carries within it the seeds of its own resolution. The goddess Nyx, ancient night herself, older than the Olympians, sometimes visits Aries in these deep hours. She alone remembers when he was born, the purpose woven into his very essence by the fates. She reminds him that he is not a mistake or a necessary evil, but an integral part of the cosmic design. Without him, she whispers with the voice of rustling leaves, there would be no growth, no change, no evolution. Stagnation is the true death, and he, in bringing challenge, brings life. Their conversations, held in the language of primordial deities that predates human speech, touch on mysteries too deep for mortal comprehension. They speak of the time before time, when chaos ruled not as disorder, but as pure potential. They discuss how from that potential came the necessity for forces in opposition not to destroy, but to define, not to end, but to create through tension the dynamic universe in which all beings exist. As our tale approaches its gentle conclusion, like a lullaby winding down to its final notes, we find Aries standing once more at the edge of Olympus. The pre-dawn breeze carries with it the prayers of mortals beginning to wake soldiers praying for strength, mothers praying for their children's safety, leaders praying for wisdom to avoid unnecessary conflict. He hears each prayer and answers not always with what is asked, but with what is needed: courage to face the day, wisdom to choose battles wisely, strength to build rather than destroy. Below in the mortal realm, the first birds begin their tentative morning songs, though true dawn is still far away. These early singers, brave in their willingness to break the silence, remind Aries of warriors he has known, who chose to speak for peace when silence would have been safer. Their songs build slowly, each voice adding to the chorus, until what began as scattered notes becomes a symphony of hope for the coming day. The stars, those distant suns that have watched over countless conflicts and resolutions, begin their slow fade as the eastern sky lightens, almost imperceptibly. Each star, Aries knows, presides over worlds where similar struggles play out the eternal dance of opposition and reconciliation. The forever spiral of conflict, leading to growth, leading to peace, leading to new challenges. He is not the god of just one world, but an archetype present wherever consciousness evolves through struggle. In the healing temples dedicated to him, the night priests prepare for the dawn ceremonies. These rituals, passed down through generations, honor not victory in battle, but survival, not conquest, but endurance, not the glory of war, but the grace of peace. The priests light candles for every warrior who chose mercy, burn incense for every conflict avoided, pour libations for every enemy who became a friend. These quiet ceremonies, witnessed only by the divine and the dedicated, are the true worship Aries treasures. As the night's tale draws to its close, we see Aries not as the fierce god of war, but as the complex deity of necessary struggle and eventual transcendence. He carries within himself all the contradictions of existence, the need for both conflict and peace, the reality of both destruction and creation, the truth that sometimes we must fight to protect what we love while always remembering that the goal is not eternal battle, but eventual harmony. The other gods begin to stir in their celestial dwellings, preparing for the day's divine duties. Apollo readies his chariot to bring the sun. Artemis returns from her nightly hunt. Hermes prepares for his first messages of the day, but Aries remains at his vigil a while longer, watching over the liminal space between night and day, between sleep and waking, between peace and the challenges that daylight will inevitably bring. In this threshold moment, he embodies perfectly his role as the god of boundaries, not just between peace and war, but between all opposing forces that must find balance for existence to continue. He is the guardian of necessary tensions, the keeper of the flame that both destroys and purifies, the divine force that ensures growth through challenge, while always holding space for resolution and peace. As you drift toward sleep, carried by these ancient tales like a boat on calm waters, remember that Aries watches over your rest, not as a bringer of conflict to your dreams, but as a guardian ensuring that your sleep is peaceful, that your struggles of the day can be laid down, that in the sanctuary of night you can find the restoration needed to face tomorrow's challenges with courage and grace. The last prayers of the night rise like incense to Olympus prayers, not for victory, but for strength, not for conquest, but for courage, not for the defeat of enemies, but for the wisdom to transform opposition into opportunity. Aries receives each prayer with the compassion of one who understands the weight of necessary struggle, who knows that every mortal carries battles within themselves that no one else can see. And so, as the faintest light of pre-dawn touches the eastern sky, though sunrise is still hours away, Aries makes his final rounds of the night. He visits the dreams of warriors, bringing not visions of glory, but memories of homecoming. He touches the sleeping forms of those who will face conflicts tomorrow, granting not eagerness for battle, but readiness to seek resolution. He blesses the peacemakers with the strength to stand between opposing forces, the bridge builders with the courage to span chasms of misunderstanding. In the great cycle of existence, Aries plays his part with dignity and purpose. He is not the enemy of peace, but its necessary companion, not the destroyer of harmony, but the force that makes harmony meaningful. Through struggle comes growth. Through conflict comes clarity. Through challenge comes the opportunity to choose who we truly are. This is his gift to mortals and immortals alike, not easy lives, but meaningful ones. Not absence of conflict, but the tools to transform conflict into wisdom. The night wind carries one last whisper from the god of war, a benediction for all who rest beneath the stars. May your necessary battles be few. May your courage never falter when facing what must be faced. May you always remember that the greatest victory is finding peace. And may you know that even in your darkest struggles, you do not stand alone. The God who understands conflict understands also the heart that seeks peace and honors both with equal measure. As Morpheus, god of dreams, begins to weave his gentle spell over your consciousness, as the tale of Aries folds into the greater tapestry of night, as the boundary between waking and sleeping grows soft and permeable, know that you have heard a sacred story, not the tale of a destroyer, but of a guardian, not the saga of endless war, but the promise of eventual peace, not the glorification of conflict, but the recognition that through meeting our challenges with courage and wisdom, we transform both ourselves and our world. Rest now, dear listener, in the peace that understanding brings. Let the complex truths of Aries settle into your dreams like seeds in fertile ground, to bloom perhaps in tomorrow's choices between conflict and compassion, between necessary struggle and unnecessary strife. The god of war has shared his deeper nature with you, revealing that even in the heart of conflict lives the longing for peace, that even in the midst of struggle exists the path to transcendence. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. The moon continues its silver journey across the heavens, and somewhere on high Olympus, Aries keeps his eternal watch, not eager for the conflicts tomorrow may bring, but ready to help mortals face them with courage, resolve them with wisdom, and transform them into stepping stones on the path to greater understanding. In this sacred duty, performed through countless ages and continuing through ages yet to come, lies the true nature of the God we have come to know tonight. And as the final words of our tale drift away like smoke from a banked fire. As consciousness yields to the realm of dreams, as the night embraces you with the gentleness of divine understanding. Remember this: you carry within yourself a spark of Aries, not the urge to conflict, but the courage to face it when necessary, not the desire for battle, but the strength to protect what you love, not the hunger for victory, but the wisdom to seek resolution. This divine spark, tempered by compassion and guided by wisdom, is one of the gods' greatest gifts to mortal kind. Sleep now and dream of peace, but know that should challenges come with the dawn, you have heard the true story of Aries, and you understand that conflict need not mean destruction, that struggle can lead to growth, that even in the midst of necessary battles, the goal remains always the same: to transform opposition into opportunity, to change enemies into understanding, to find in the heart of struggle the path that leads, always and eventually, back to peace. In the name of all the gods who watch over mortal sleep, in the blessing of night that brings rest to the weary, in the promise of dawn that will come in its appointed hour, we bid you peaceful slumber. May Aries guard your rest from needless conflict. May Morpheus bring you dreams of resolution and reconciliation. May all the divine forces that govern the cosmos conspire to bring you restoration and renewal. And so our tale ends as it began, in the quiet hour when stories have the power to transform consciousness. When ancient wisdom speaks, most clearly boundaries between mortal and divine grow thin enough for truth to pass through. The story of Aries, god of necessary struggle and eventual peace, settles into the depths of your being, a seed of understanding that will bloom in its season. Rest well, dream deeply, and wake renewed. The night holds you in its gentle embrace. The stars sing their silent lullabies, and somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, between conflict and peace, between what was and what might be, Aries stands guard over your transformation, not as the god of war, but as the god of the courage to face life's battles and the wisdom to transcend them. May peace be with you through the night, and courage with you come the dawn. May the lessons of the God who bridges war and peace guide you in all your days. And may you always remember that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the power to protect, not in the eagerness for conflict, but in the readiness to transform it into understanding. The tale is told, the night deepens, and all of Olympus wishes you rest. Sleep now, carried by ancient stories into the realm of dreams, knowing that you have touched the mystery of one of existence's most misunderstood forces, and found in it not terror, but teaching, not destruction, but the promise of transformation. In the morning, the world will turn again, bringing its mixture of challenge and opportunity. But for now, in this sacred darkness, there is only peace. Farewell, traveler in the realms of myth. May your dreams be gentle and your rest complete. The story of Aries goes with you into sleep, a guardian and guide through whatever struggles tomorrow may bring. And always, always, may you remember that after every conflict comes the possibility of peace. After every struggle, the opportunity for growth. After every ending, the promise of a new beginning. The night embraces all, and in its depths, even the god of war finds peace. Yet, our tale continues, for the mysteries of Ares run deeper than the deepest ocean, more ancient than the oldest mountains. As you settle into the rhythm of this eternal story, let us explore further the hidden sanctuaries, where the true nature of the war god reveals itself in ways that few mortals have ever understood. In the northern reaches of the divine realm, where the aurora borealis paints the sky with colors that have no names in mortal tongues, there stands a tower that belongs to Ares alone. This tower, built not of stone or celestial marble, but of crystallized intentions, rises through all the levels of existence. At its base lie the raw emotions of conflict, fear, anger, desperation. But as one ascends, these base materials transform, floor by floor, into nobility, sacrifice, protection, and ultimately, at the tower's peak, into pure love. For what is the willingness to fight if not love for what we protect? Ares would climb this tower nightly, not because he needed to. Gods can appear wherever they wish, but because the journey itself was a meditation. Each level reminded him of the transformation possible within conflict. On the third floor, he kept a gallery of moments when rage became righteous action. On the seventh, where windows opened onto all possible futures, he collected instances of conflicts that led to lasting peace. On the 13th floor, accessible only to him and occasionally Athena, lay the archive of unspoken truths, the real reasons behind every war ever fought, often so different from what historians recorded. The mortals who truly understood Ares were often not warriors at all, but philosophers, poets, and healers who recognized that his domain extended far beyond physical battle. In the great library of Alexandria, before it burned, there existed scrolls that spoke of Ares as the necessary opposition, the divine force that prevented stagnation. These texts, written by initiates of his mysteries, described exercises in controlled conflict, not violence, but structured opposition designed to strengthen resolve and clarify purpose. One such exercise involved pairs of students standing back to back, pushing against each other with equal force. Neither trying to win, both working to maintain perfect balance. This, the masters taught, was the true nature of Ares, not one force overwhelming another, but opposing forces creating stability through their very opposition. The students would maintain this position for hours, learning that conflict need not mean conquest, that opposition could create rather than destroy. In the healing gardens of Asclepios, where the divine physician tended to both gods and chosen mortals, Ares was a frequent visitor. Not as patient gods rarely need healing, but as student, he would watch Asclepios work, seeing how the healer god would sometimes need to cause pain to cure disease, would need to break bones to set them properly, would need to open wounds to clean infection. Here was conflict in its purest form, the necessary damage that led to greater healing. Asclepios would explain to Ares that they were more alike than different. Both dealt with necessary harm in service of a greater good. Both understood that sometimes destruction was the first step toward creation. Both knew the weight of causing pain even when it served a higher purpose. These conversations, held over centuries in the herb-scented air of the healing gardens, shaped Ares' understanding of his own nature. The constellations tell their own stories of Ares, written in stars by gods whose perspective spans eons. There is not just the warrior constellation, but also the guardian, the protector, the one who stands between. These star patterns, visible only to divine eyes, and the most gifted mortal astronomers, shift and change with the seasons of cosmic understanding. Sometimes the warrior's sword points downward in peace. Sometimes the shield grows larger than the sword. Sometimes the entire figure transforms into a bridge spanning a celestial river. On quiet nights, shepherds who knew the old ways would point out these subtle changes to their children, teaching them that even the stars understood that war and peace were not fixed states, but flowing conditions. They would tell stories of how Ares himself placed certain stars to guide warriors home, how he created celestial landmarks that would help lost soldiers find their way back to their families. These shepherd tales, passed down through generations, preserved truths that grander epics often missed. In the mortal realm, there were places where the veil between the domain of Ares and the physical world grew thin. These were not always battlefields, though some were. More often, they were places of transformation, mountain passes where travelers had to choose their path, bridges where enemies met and chose reconciliation over revenge, crossroads where crucial decisions shaped the fate of nations. At these locations, sensitive souls could feel the presence of Ares, not as a force urging toward violence, but as a clarifying energy that helped people understand what was truly worth fighting for. One such place was a simple well in a village whose name history forgot. The well had been the site of a conflict over water rights that threatened to destroy two communities. But instead of fighting, the village's leaders met at the well and devised a sharing system that not only prevented war, but created bonds of cooperation that lasted centuries. The well became a shrine to Ares the Resolver, and people would travel great distances to drink from its waters before making important decisions about conflict in their own lives. The relationship between Ares and time itself deserves contemplation. Unlike mortals, who experience time as a river flowing in one direction, gods perceive it more like an ocean with currents moving in all directions. Ares could see how conflicts rippled through time, how a war in one century created the conditions for peace in the next. How a moment of mercy could prevent generations of revenge. How the courage of one individual could inspire thousands across the ages. This temporal perspective gave Ares a patience that mortals rarely understood. When they prayed for immediate victory, he saw the longer patterns. When they begged for their enemy's destruction, he understood how today's foe could become tomorrow's crucial ally. This sometimes made him seem cruel or indifferent to mortal suffering. But in truth, it reflected a compassion too vast for human comprehension, a desire to guide conflicts toward resolutions that would benefit not just the present, but the future. The sacred mathematics of Ares formed another mystery cult, where philosopher priests studied the patterns within conflict. They discovered that disputes followed predictable rhythms, that escalation and de-escalation moved in waves that could be mapped and sometimes redirected. They developed a numerology of conflict resolution, finding that certain numbers, particularly 3, 7, and 13, appeared repeatedly in successful peace negotiations. 3 attempts at communication before considering force, 7 days of contemplation before major decisions, 13 witnesses to peace agreements to ensure their sanctity. These mathematical mysteries revealed that Ares was not a god of chaos, but of complex order. Even in the apparent randomness of battle, patterns emerged. Even in the fury of conflict, underlying structures could be discerned. The priests would create mandala-like diagrams showing how conflicts spiraled outward, but could also spiral inward toward resolution if approached with the right understanding. These diagrams, when meditated upon, helped warriors become peacemakers, and peacemakers become strong enough to enforce their ideals. In the divine realm, Ares maintained friendships that might surprise those who knew him only by reputation. With Hephaestus, the smith god, he shared a bond deeper than their complex connection through Aphrodite. Together, they would work in the celestial forges, creating not weapons of war, but tools of transformation. They forged plowshares that could break the hardest ground, symbolic of how the strength developed in conflict could be turned to peaceful purposes. They created shields that reflected not just physical attacks, but the intentions behind them, forcing attackers to confront their own motivations. Their greatest collaboration was the sword of truth, a blade that could cut through deceptions and illusions, but could not harm anyone acting with genuine intent. This sword was given to mortal heroes not to win battles, but to prevent them, to slice through the misunderstandings and lies that so often led to unnecessary conflict. Many wars ended not with the sword drawing blood, but with it revealing the truth that made fighting pointless. With Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, Ares found another unexpected connection. The wine god understood that release was sometimes necessary, that the controlled loss of control could prevent the uncontrolled explosion of violence. Together, they instituted festivals where old grievances could be aired through dance and song rather than swords and spears. Warriors would drink specially prepared wine that lowered inhibitions just enough to speak truths usually left unsaid, to weep for fallen enemies, to embrace those they had been taught to hate. These Dionysianarian festivals became crucial pressure releases in societies built on honor and competition. They provided safe spaces for the expression of emotions that, if suppressed, could lead to devastating conflicts. Veterans found healing in the wild dances. Enemies found common ground in shared intoxication. The morning after always brought slight embarrassment, but also deeper understanding, as if the wine had washed away the artificial barriers that kept people apart. The feminine aspects of Aries, rarely discussed in classical sources, emerged in certain mystery traditions. These recognized that the god of war contained within himself all genders' approaches to conflict, the protector mother defending her children, the strategic queen managing palace intrigue, the wise crone who had seen enough conflict to know its true cost. In these mysteries, Aries appeared sometimes as female, sometimes as both, sometimes as neither, teaching that conflict and its resolution transcended simple categorizations. Priestesses of these mysteries learned martial arts not for aggression, but for the deep understanding of force and resistance, action and reaction. They studied the mythology of warrior women Amazons, Valkyries, warrior queens not as aberrations, but as expressions of Ares' full nature. They understood that the fiercest fighters were often those protecting life, not seeking death, and that the maternal instinct to protect could be the most powerful force on any battlefield. As our deepening tale continues its nocturnal journey, we must speak of the dreams Ares sends to mortals. Unlike Morpheus, who crafts dreams of fantasy and symbolism, Ares sends visions of clarity. A soldier planning an unnecessary attack might dream of his enemy's children waiting for a father who would never return. A ruler contemplating war might experience the battle from the perspective of the common soldiers who would die for royal ambition. These dreams were not punishments, but gifts of perspective, opportunities to choose differently. But Ares also sent dreams of courage to those who needed it, the oppressed dreaming of standing up to tyrants, the weak envisioning themselves strong enough to protect others, the peaceful finding within themselves the steel necessary to defend peace. These dreams often came the night before crucial moments, providing just enough divine inspiration to tip the balance toward bravery. Many heroes' journeys began with such a dream, waking with the knowledge that they carried Ares' blessing not for conquest, but for necessary action. The sacred groves of Ares held trees of remarkable properties. The most famous was the iron oak, whose wood was hard as metal, but still lived and grew. Warriors would hang their weapons on its branches when they retired from fighting, and the tree would slowly absorb the metal, transforming swords and spears into living wood. Eventually, these weapons would bloom, producing flowers of extraordinary beauty. Veterans would return years later to find their instruments of war had become sources of beauty, a living reminder that transformation was always possible. Another grove contained the empathy willows, whose drooping branches created chambers of solitude where enemies could meet in absolute privacy. The trees themselves emanated an aura that made deception impossible and violence unthinkable. Many feuds that had lasted generations ended in the shelter of these willows, as people finally spoke the truths that pride had long prevented them from voicing. The trees wept sap that, when dried, formed amber containing the memories of reconciliation, treasured tokens that reminded people of what was possible when pride was set aside. The music of Ares was not what most would expect. Rather than martial drums and brass, his sacred music consisted of harmonies that could only be created by instruments that had been broken and repaired. The cracks in a mended drum gave it unique tones. The repaired strings of a lyre carried notes both sweet and slightly discordant. This music spoke to the truth that things broken and healed often became more beautiful than those that had never known damage. Warriors would weep hearing these songs, recognizing their own broken and mended souls in the notes. Musicians dedicated to Ares learned to play in styles that embodied conflict resolution. Two competing melodies would clash and strain against each other before finding unexpected harmony. Rhythms would fight for dominance before settling into complex polyrhythms more interesting than either alone. The greatest of these musicians could play pieces that guided listeners through the entire emotional journey of conflict, from peace through rising tension to explosive climax, and finally to a resolution more beautiful for having encompassed the struggle. In the depths of the ocean, where Poseidon ruled, there were underwater temples to Ares that few knew existed. These were not for the god of land battles, but for Ares as the governor of all conflicts, including those between the elements themselves, where sea met shore in eternal contest, where tides fought the land's resistance, where waves battled wind. In all these places, Ares' influence could be felt. Priests of these underwater temples were often former pirates who had learned that the sea's conflicts were metaphors for larger truths. These ocean priests taught that just as waves must rise and fall, conflicts too had their rhythms. They observed how the most violent storms eventually exhausted themselves, how the sea always returned to calm. They would take warriors to witness the tide pools, showing how creatures that competed fiercely at low tide would share space peacefully when the water returned. Nature itself, they taught, showed that conflict was temporary, but cooperation was sustainable. The libraries of Ares contained not books of strategy, but chronicles of peace. Every treaty, every truce, Every moment when swords were lowered instead of raised, all were recorded here. The god would spend hours reading these accounts, finding in them more satisfaction than in any victory. He particularly treasured the small pieces, the soldier who shared water with a wounded enemy, the general who chose retreat over Pyrrhic victory, the child who chose forgiveness over revenge for a parent's death. These libraries were tended by spirits of warriors who had chosen peace in crucial moments. Their reward for breaking cycles of violence was eternal service in these halls of reconciliation. They would guide living visitors to exactly the scroll they needed to read, the account that would help them find their own path to peace. Many who entered these libraries seeking strategies for victory left with strategies for avoiding the need for victory altogether. As night continues its gentle hold upon the world, we must speak of the seasons of Aries. Unlike the agricultural seasons governed by Demeter or the solar seasons of Apollo, Aries seasons were cycles of conflict and resolution that moved through mortal societies. The season of questioning, when old conflicts were examined to see if they still served purpose. The season of strength, when communities built their defenses and trained their guardians. The season of testing, when conflicts that could not be avoided were faced. And finally, the season of healing, when wounds both physical and spiritual were tended. Societies that recognized these seasons and worked with them rather than against them found greater stability. They understood that trying to maintain perpetual peace was as impossible as perpetual war. Instead, they prepared for each season appropriately, strengthening bonds during peaceful times that would help them weather conflicts, creating healing practices that would be ready when needed, establishing traditions of questioning that prevented unnecessary battles. The sacred symbols of Aries evolved over time, reflecting mortals' growing understanding of his nature. Early symbols were simple swords, shields, helmets, but later mystics added more complex imagery, the broken chain representing liberation from cycles of revenge, the clasped hands showing former enemies united, the phoenix embodying renewal through destruction, the olive branch growing through a helm depicting peace emerging from the apparatus of war. Each symbol carried layers of meaning that initiates would contemplate for years. In the workshop of symbols, divine artisans created new representations as human understanding evolved. They crafted images of Aries as teacher, showing him instructing mortals in the arts of controlled opposition. They depicted him as gardener, pruning the excessive growth that, left unchecked, would strangle life. They showed him as shepherd, protecting the flock not through aggression, but through vigilance and appropriate response to threats. These evolving symbols helped mortals see that their understanding of the divine could grow and change. The midnight hour of our tale brings us to the deepest mysteries of Aries, his role in the cosmos itself. For conflict exists not just between mortals or even gods, but between the fundamental forces of existence. Order and chaos, expansion and contraction, creation and entropy, all existed in dynamic tension. Ares governed these cosmic conflicts, ensuring that neither force ever achieved total victory, for either would mean the end of existence as we know it. In the cosmic dance, Ares partnered with Harmonia, dancing the eternal ballet of opposition and resolution. Their movements created the patterns that galaxies followed in their collisions and mergers. Their rhythm set the pulse of stellar birth and death. Their harmony ensured that from every cosmic conflict came new creation, stellar nurseries born from the death of ancient stars. New elements forged in the hearts of supernovae, life arising from the tension between entropy and organization. The philosophy of Ares influenced mortal thought in ways scholars rarely acknowledged. The concept of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis bore his fingerprints. The understanding that growth came through challenge, that strength developed through resistance, that clarity emerged from confusion, all these insights carried the wisdom of the god who governed necessary opposition. Philosophers who thought themselves purely rational were channeling Aryan wisdom when they used debate and dialectic to approach truth. In the realm of personal transformation, Ares' influence was profound but subtle. Every time someone faced their fears, they touched his domain. Every moment of choosing courage over comfort, of standing for principles despite opposition, of protecting the vulnerable despite personal risk, in all these moments, mortals became priests of Ares, whether they knew it or not. The gods smiled upon these small acts of courage more than upon great battles, knowing that true change came from millions of individual choices rather than singular grand gestures. The healing aspects of Ares manifested in unexpected ways. Veterans found that working with horses helped them process their traumas. The wordless communication with powerful animals, allowing them to reconnect with their own strength while learning gentleness. Gardens tended by those who had seen too much death became places of extraordinary beauty, as if the earth itself responded to their need to create rather than destroy. Art created by warriors often carried a poignancy that spoke to the human cost of conflict in ways that touched hearts more deeply than any political argument. Communities that understood Ares' true nature developed rituals of reintegration for their warriors, rather than leaving them to struggle alone with what they had seen and done. These societies created ceremonies that acknowledged both the necessity and the cost of their service. Warriors would pass through symbolic deaths and rebirths, laying down not just their weapons, but the spiritual weight of conflict. They would be welcomed back not as unchanged heroes, but as transformed individuals who had carried society's burden and needed society's support in return. As our tale winds through the deep night like a river through sleeping lands, we come to the oracle of Ares, less famous than Delphi, but no less significant. This oracle spoke not in riddles, but in clarities too sharp for comfortable hearing. Those who consulted it, seeking divine approval for planned conflicts, often left with their motivations laid bare, their true reasons exposed. The oracle's pronouncements were so precise, so unflinchingly honest, that many chose to abandon their plans rather than proceed with self-deception stripped away. The priests of this oracle were chosen for their ability to see through justifications to core truths. They trained for years in the art of compassionate clarity, learning to deliver harsh truths in ways that opened hearts rather than hardening them. Their greatest skill was helping querents see that most conflicts arose not from true opposition, but from misunderstanding, fear, or wounded pride. Many wars ended in the oracle's chambers before they began, dissolved by the simple act of clearly seeing their pointlessness. In distant lands, where Ares was known by other names, his nature remained consistent. Whether called Mars or Tyr, Nergal or Cardiacia, the divine principle of necessary conflict and eventual resolution appeared in every culture that had grown complex enough to need it. These different faces of the same truth showed that Ares was not merely a Greek god, but a universal principle, as necessary to human development as any other divine force. The syncretism of these traditions revealed deeper truths. Where cultures met and initially clashed, their war gods often merged or were recognized as aspects of the same divinity. This theological blending mirrored the human process of conflict resolution, initial opposition giving way to recognition of commonality, leading to a synthesis richer than either original tradition. The gods themselves modeled the transformation they hoped to inspire in mortals. In the gentle hours before dawn, when the world holds its breath between night and day, Ares performs his most sacred duty. He visits the dreams of children who have witnessed violence, bringing not forgetfulness, but integration. These young souls, wounded by conflicts they did not create or understand, receive his special attention. In their dreams, he appears not as a warrior, but as various comforting figures: a strong grandfather, a protective older sibling, a wise teacher who helps them understand that the violence they witnessed was not their fault and did not define their future. Through these dream visitations, Ares plants seeds of resilience. Children who might have grown up perpetuating cycles of violence instead find within themselves the strength to break those patterns. They dream of becoming healers, teachers, builders, those who repair what conflict has broken. The god of war's greatest victory is every child who chooses creation over destruction despite having every reason to choose otherwise. The sacred calendars of Ares tracked not just days, but generations. His priests understood that true peace was not achieved in single lifetimes, but across multiple generations. They kept records of feuds resolved, noting how long it took for former enemies to become true allies, usually 3 generations. They observed. The grandchildren of those who fought could be friends. The great-grandchildren could marry. By the 5th generation, the conflict that once seemed worth dying for would be merely a cautionary tale. This long view influenced how his priests advised those seeking guidance. Rather than focusing only on immediate resolution, they helped people think about what they wanted their great-grandchildren to inherit. Did they want to pass down hatred or healing? Did they want their descendants bound by old grievances or free to form new relationships? This generational thinking transformed many conflicts from zero-sum competitions to collaborative efforts to create better futures. In the Vale of Echoes, sacred to Ares, sounds of ancient battles still reverberated. But these echoes had been transformed through divine alchemy. What began as death cries had become songs of remembrance. Clashing swords had transformed into wind chimes. The thunder of charging armies had gentled into the sound of distant rain. Pilgrims would come to listen to these transformed echoes, learning that even the worst sounds of human conflict could, given time and divine grace, become something almost beautiful. The transformation of these echoes was not denial of the horror of war, but integration of it into larger patterns of meaning. The veil taught that pretending conflict never happened was as dangerous as glorifying it. Instead, the echoes preserved memory while transforming trauma into teaching. Veterans found particular solace here, hearing their own traumatic memories reflected but transformed, suggesting that their own inner echoes might similarly gentle with time. As starlight gives way to the first gray of pre-dawn, though sunrise is still distant, we must speak of Ares' greatest teaching, the paradox of strength. True strength, he taught, was not the ability to destroy, but the ability to refrain from destruction when one could destroy. The strongest warriors were those who could win, but chose not to fight. The mightiest nations were those that could conquer, but chose cooperation. This paradox frustrated those who sought simple answers, but illuminated the path for those ready for deeper wisdom. This teaching manifested in the training of elite warriors who spent as much time in meditation as in combat practice. They learned to fight not with anger, but with clarity. They studied not just how to defeat enemies, but how to transform them into allies. Their highest achievement was winning battles without fighting them, resolving conflicts before they escalated to violence. These warrior diplomats became Ares' truest servants, embodying his evolution from simple war god to complex deity of necessary change. In the sanctuary of swords, weapons from across the ages were displayed not as trophies, but as reminders. Each blade, spear, and arrow carried a small placard telling not of victories won, but of what was lost the warrior who would never return home, the family left grieving, the potential futures cut short. visitors walked through in silence, the weight of accumulated loss growing with each display. At the sanctuary's heart stood an anvil where visitors could bring their own weapons to be transformed into tools, the ritual beating of sword into plowshare, a prayer more powerful than any words. The transformation was never forced. Ares understood that some needed to remain warriors, that peace required guardians. But for those ready to lay down arms, the sanctuary provided a sacred space for that transition. The rhythmic hammering of transformation became a meditation, each blow releasing not just the weapon's form, but the warrior's identity, allowing something new to emerge. Many tears were shed at that anvil, tears of grief and relief intermingled. In the chronicles of divine interventions, Ares' actions often went unnoticed because they prevented rather than caused dramatic events. A whispered doubt in the ear of an overconfident general, a moment of compassion inspired in a vengeful heart, a child's question that made adults reconsider their hatred. These subtle interventions, lacking the drama of thunderbolts or miraculous transformations, were Ares' preferred methods as he matured in his role. He had learned that the smallest touch at the right moment could redirect the course of history. The god took particular interest in moments when individuals stood at crossroads between violence and restraint. A hand reaching for a weapon might feel a strange reluctance. Eyes meeting across a battlefield might recognize shared humanity. These were Ares' gifts, not the rage of battle, but the pause before it, the moment when choice was still possible. Many conflicts ended in these pauses, dissolved by the simple recognition that there was still time to choose differently. The sacred mathematics of peace, as revealed in Aryan mysteries, showed that reconciliation followed patterns as precise as those of music or astronomy. Apologies needed to acknowledge specific harms. Reparations needed to match damages. Time needed to pass in measured intervals for healing to occur. The priests developed formulas not for victory, but for sustainable peace, understanding that just as there were laws of war, there were laws of resolution that, if followed, made recurrence less likely. These mathematical principles were taught through sacred games that modeled conflict and resolution. Players would compete fiercely within the game's boundaries, but were required to reconcile afterward, transforming game opponents into real allies. The games grew increasingly complex as students advanced, eventually modeling the intricate dynamics of multi-generational conflicts and their resolutions. Masters of these games became advisors to kings, their playful practice translating into real-world peacemaking. In the garden of unplanted seeds, Ares kept the potential conflicts that never sprouted. Each seed represented a war prevented, a feud resolved before it began, a cycle of violence broken. The garden was vast, its paths winding through section after section of dormant possibilities. Some seeds were small prevented arguments between neighbors. Others were massive wars between nations that diplomacy averted. Walking these paths, visitors understood that Ares' greatest victories were invisible. The conflicts that never happened, the blood never shed. Tending this garden were the spirits of peacemakers throughout history, those who had prevented conflicts through wisdom, courage, or sacrifice. They watered the seeds with tears of joy, knowing that each unplanted seed represented lives saved, futures preserved, possibilities maintained. Their work was never done, for new seeds arrived constantly as mortals chose peace over war, understanding over ignorance, love over fear. The garden grew larger with each passing age, a testament to humanity's slowly growing wisdom. The moonlight wanes as our tale approaches its final movements, like a great symphony drawing toward its ultimate resolution. In the council of reflection, where gods gathered to contemplate their roles and impacts, Ares often sat silent. His brothers and sisters would speak of their gifts, to humanity Demeter's grain, Apollo's music, Athena's wisdom. When finally asked about his contribution, Ares would gesture to the empty spaces between the others' gifts. I gave them the strength to protect what you gave them, he would say. I gave them the courage to value it. I gave them the knowledge that some things are worth struggling for. This understanding transformed how the other gods saw their brother. He was not the antithesis of their peaceful gifts, but their necessary guardian. Without Ares, Demeter's grain would be stolen by the strong from the weak. Without him, Apollo's music would be silenced by tyrants. Without him, Athena's wisdom would be crushed beneath ignorance backed by force. He was the protector of peace, the guardian of growth, the defender of all that made life worth living. In mortal lands, this understanding slowly spread. Temples to Ares began to include schools where children learned both self-defense and conflict resolution. Warriors trained alongside diplomats, each learning from the other. The arts of war and peace were taught as complementary skills, both necessary for a complete education. Students learned that knowing how to fight made one less likely to need to fight, that understanding violence helped one choose nonviolence from strength rather than weakness. The evening star, last to fade before dawn, held special significance for Ares. It appeared at the threshold between day and night, marking transitions. Warriors would pray to this star before battles, not for victory, but for the wisdom to know when victory meant more than winning. Peacemakers would watch for it as a sign that their work of transforming days' conflicts was complete. The star itself became a symbol of Ares, evolved nature martial brightness, transformed into gentle guidance. In the quiet moments before battles, when warriors prepared themselves for what might be their last dawn, Ares would move among them unseen. He would not inspire bloodlust or remove fear. Fear was appropriate when facing death. Instead, he would help them remember why they fought, what they protected, who waited for their return. This clarification of purpose either strengthened their resolve or helped them realize the fight was not worth it. Either way, they faced the coming conflict with clarity rather than confusion. The sacred breath of Ares, practiced by his warrior priests, involved breathing in conflict and breathing out resolution. Practitioners would visualize drawing in the world's tensions with each inhalation, holding them in their lungs where they were transformed, then exhaling peace. This practice, performed by thousands across the ages, created a network of conscious transformers, human alchemists turning the lead of conflict into the gold of understanding. The breath itself became a prayer, wordless but profound. Advanced practitioners could perform this breathing in the midst of actual conflicts, becoming islands of calm in storms of violence. Their presence alone could de-escalate situations, their centeredness reminding others that choice existed even in extremity. Many battles paused when such a practitioner walked between the armies, their simple presence a reminder that another way existed. Some conflicts ended in these pauses, the breathing space becoming permanent peace. The twilight teachings of Ares spoke of the time between times, the spaces between absolutes where transformation was possible. Dawn and dusk, the moments between sleep and waking, the pause between heartbeats in these liminal spaces, the rigid boundaries that created conflict could soften. His priests learned to guide negotiations during these threshold times, when positions were less fixed, when the impossible seemed merely difficult. This understanding of timing became crucial to conflict resolution, rather than forcing discussions when positions were hardened by the harsh light of noon certainty. Wise mediators waited for the gentle hours when shadows made edges less sharp. They understood that humans, like gods, were most capable of change when not locked into rigid definitions of self and other. Ares taught that victory achieved in these soft hours lasted longer than those won through hard force. As the first birds begin their pre-dawn songs, though darkness still blankets the land, we near the end of our journey through the mysteries of Ares. But endings, the god teaches, are also beginnings. Every conflict resolved creates space for new growth. Every warrior who lays down arms becomes available for other work. Every enemy who becomes a friend doubles the community's strength. The end of war is not emptiness, but opportunity. In his final teaching to mortals, Ares spoke of the ultimate victory, the day when his intervention would no longer be needed, not because conflict would cease to exist, for creative tension would always drive growth, but because humanity would have internalized his lessons so completely that they could navigate their conflicts without divine intervention. Like a parent teaching a child to walk, his goal was not eternal dependence, but eventual independence. This teaching brought hope to those who despaired of humanity's violent tendencies. If even the god of war looked forward to his own obsolescence, Then peace was not just a dream, but a destination. The path might be long, winding through necessary conflicts and hard-won wisdom, but it led somewhere worth going. Each generation that chose resolution over revenge, understanding over ignorance, brought that day closer. The final mystery of Aries, revealed only to those who completed his deepest initiations, was that he was not separate from those he guided, but present within them. The courage to face conflict, the wisdom to resolve it, the strength to choose peace, these were not gifts bestowed from outside, but potentials awakened from within. Every mortal carried the divine spark of necessary opposition and eventual resolution. Aries' role was not to grant these qualities, but to help individuals recognize and develop what they already possessed. This revelation transformed initiates' understanding not just of Aries, but of themselves. They were not supplicants begging for divine intervention, but co-creators working with divine principles. Their conflicts were not punishments from angry gods, but opportunities for growth. Their victories were not gifts from heaven, but achievements of their own divine nature expressing itself. This understanding brought both greater responsibility and greater hope as the eastern sky shows the faintest blush of approaching dawn. Though stars still shine in the western darkness, Aries prepares for his final transformation of the night. He sheds his armor piece by piece, each removal a small liberation. Beneath the bronze and iron lies not the muscled form of a warrior, but light itself, not harsh or blinding, but gentle, like candle flames seen through amber. This is his truest form, usually hidden because mortals expect their war god to appear warlike. The armor itself transforms as he removes it. The helmet becomes a nest where birds of peace can raise their young. The breastplate becomes a mirror reflecting not physical appearance, but spiritual truth. The sword becomes a bridge spanning a chasm. The shield becomes a round table where former enemies can sit as equals. The spear becomes a staff supporting those exhausted by conflict. Each piece, freed from its warlike purpose, reveals its potential for peace. In this form of gentle light, Aries visits one last group before dawn, the dreamers, who will wake with new ideas for ending old conflicts. To them, he gives not visions of victory, but innovations of reconciliation, a new way to structure negotiations, a ritual that allows face-saving retreat, a technology that makes cooperation more profitable than competition. These inspirations, arriving in the liminal space between sleep and waking, have ended more conflicts than all the swords ever forged. The cock crows in some distant farm, though darkness still reigns, and Aries knows his night's work nears completion. He has walked the paths between war and peace, shown the connections between conflict and growth, revealed the sacred nature of necessary opposition. Most importantly, he has demonstrated that even the god of war dreams of peace, works for peace, evolves toward peace. If he can transform, moving from simple destroyer to complex guardian, then so can mortals made in the god's image. Standing once more at the edge of Olympus, as our tale completes its circle, Ares looks out over the sleeping world with eyes that have seen too much yet still hold hope. Every conflict ended creates space for new beginnings. Every warrior who chooses peace strengthens the foundation of future stability. Every child who grows up free from inherited hatred proves that cycles can be broken. The work is slow, sometimes seeming to move backward, but the overall arc bends toward resolution. The other gods join him in these pre-dawn moments, a divine assembly watching over mortal sleep. They stand in comfortable silence, each knowing their realm touches the others. Demeter's abundance requires Ares' protection. Apollo's art needs the passion that comes from struggle. Athena's wisdom includes understanding when conflict is necessary. Aphrodite's love grows stronger for having been tested. They are not separate powers, but facets of a single divine jewel, each reflecting and requiring the others. Together they witness the daily miracle despite all the conflicts of the previous day. The sun prepares to rise again. Despite all the battles fought, most of humanity sleeps peacefully. Despite all the reasons for despair, hope persists. This is perhaps Ares' greatest teaching. Not that conflict can be avoided, but that it can be survived, learned from, and transformed into wisdom. The scars of old battles become maps to better futures. In the final moments before dawn, Ares speaks a blessing over the sleeping world. It is not a prayer for the absence of conflict that would be asking for stagnation. Instead, he prays for the wisdom to engage necessary conflicts consciously, the strength to resolve them justly, and the grace to transform them into growth. He prays that mortals remember they are more than their conflicts, greater than their grievances, capable of transcending what seems fixed and immutable. The blessing spreads like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, touching every sleeper, every dreamer, every soul preparing to face a new day. It carries no words, but conveys understanding that struggle is part of life, but need not define it. That conflict can catalyze growth, but need not consume it. That even in opposition, there can be respect. Even in victory, there must be mercy. Even in defeat, there can be dignity. As the sky lightens incrementally, though true dawn remains distant, Ares transforms one final time. He becomes not invisible, but integrated, dispersing himself into the very fabric of existence. He is present in every moment of moral courage, every choice of restraint over revenge, every hand extended across old divisions. He is the strength in the arm that protects the innocent and the wisdom in the mind that seeks resolution. He is the divine principle that ensures conflict serves evolution rather than destruction. The stars begin their retreat before the coming day, each one a sun to distant worlds where similar dramas play out. Aries tends them all, not as a single entity, but as a principle woven into the structure of reality itself. Wherever consciousness evolves to the point of conflict, there too evolves the possibility of resolution. Wherever beings can choose between creation and destruction, there exists the divine spark that guides toward growth. This is not theology, but physics, not mythology, but mathematics, the fundamental law that tension creates strength, that opposition enables definition, that conflict can catalyze transcendence. Our tale draws to its close, as all tales must, but like all true stories, its ending is also a beginning. You who have listened through these long hours have received more than entertainment. You have been initiated into the mysteries of necessary conflict and eventual resolution. You carry within you now the understanding that struggle need not mean suffering, that opposition can create rather than destroy, that even the God of war serves peace. As you drift towards sleep or gently wake, depending on when these words find you, remember that you too are part of this eternal story. Every conflict you face is an opportunity for growth. Every opposition you encounter offers the chance for transcension. Every struggle you endure can strengthen rather than diminish you. The God of war walks with you not to bring conflict, but to help you navigate it with wisdom, engage it with purpose, and transform it into wisdom. The very last teaching of Aries, whispered so softly it might be mistaken for wind in leaves, is this: the greatest warriors are those who create peace. The strongest victors are those who lift up the defeated. The truest courage is admitting when we are wrong. The highest strength is gentleness backed by power. The ultimate victory is when former enemies become friends. These paradoxes are not contradictions, but higher truths, visible only to those who have walked through conflict to find the peace beyond. Sleep now if night still holds you, or wake gently if dawn approaches. Either way, you have been blessed by the understanding of Aries, God of necessary struggle and eventual peace. May your conflicts be few and purposeful. May your resolutions be just and lasting. May you find in every struggle the seed of growth, in every opposition the potential for alliance, in every ending the promise of new beginning. The tale is told, the night's journey complete, the mysteries revealed to those ready to receive them. Aries returns to his eternal vigil, watching over a world that slowly, painfully, beautifully learns to transform its conflicts into opportunities for connection. And you, dear listener, return to your life carrying new understanding that even in struggle there is sacred purpose. Even in conflict there is divine presence. Even in the darkest battles, the light of eventual peace shines, patient and eternal as the stars.